I lived alone in an old farmhouse up a hollow in Appalachia, and had for years by the time of the night I'm going to tell you about, long enough that the solitude had stopped being something I was getting used to and become simply the shape of my life. It was my people's place, an old frame farmhouse with a tin roof set back at the end of a dirt road up a narrow hollow, with the ridges rising steep on either side and the timber closed all around. And after my people were gone, it had come to me, and I'd moved up there to live the quiet life I'd always wanted. I was not a man who frightened easy. I'd lived alone in that deep country a long time, and I'd made my peace with all its sounds and its solitudes. And there was one kind of night above all that I'd come to love, and that was the rainy nights. There is nothing like a storm in those mountains when you're warm and dry inside an old house with a tin roof. The rain comes down hard and drums on the tin. In a way, that's the most comforting sound I know, and the thunder rolls down the ridges and along the hollow, building and breaking, and the lightning lights up the whole black world for an instant, and then lets it fall back into dark, and to lie in a snug old house in the middle of all that, safe and dry while the mountains rage outside, had become one of the great pleasures of my solitary life. I'd sit up late on those nights, by a lamp, with a cup of coffee or something stronger, and just listen to the storm work itself out over the hollow and feel as content as a man gets. So when the night I'm telling about came on stormy, a real one, a hard hammering rain, and the thunder already rolling as the dark came down, I was glad of it, and I settled in to enjoy it the way I always did. It was well after midnight, the storm at its full height, the rain pounding the tin, and the thunder coming hard and regular down the ridges, when the knocking started at my front door. 3 slow knocks. I came up out of my contentment all at once, every nerve gone alert, because a knock at your door after midnight, miles up a hollow from the nearest soul, in the middle of a hammering storm, is a thing that has no good explanation. Nobody comes up that road at that hour. Nobody comes up it much at any hour, and certainly not on foot in a storm like that. And there'd been no vehicle, no headlights, no engine laboring up the grade that I'd have heard even over the rain. And yet there it had been, plain, 3 slow knocks on my front door. I sat still, my heart going, and I listened, and I told myself I'd imagined it. Or that it was a branch come down against the porch, or a shutter, some ordinary thing the storm had done. And for a moment, there was nothing but the rain and the thunder, and I almost talked myself back down. And then it came again. And that was when I understood the thing about it that turned my blood to ice water, the thing I have never been able to get out of my mind in all the years since. The knocks came with the thunder. I want to make this as clear as I can, because it's the whole horror of that night, and it's a small thing to say, and a vast thing to sit inside of. There would be a roll of thunder, building up and breaking over the hollow, and in the sound of it, hidden inside it, would come the knocks, 3 of them, slow, deliberate, landing in the noise of the thunder, so that they were nearly covered by it, nearly lost in it, so that each time I'd half doubt I'd heard them at all, and then the thunder would fade, and there'd be only the rain, and the knocking would stop, and I'd sit there straining, wondering if I'd imagined it. And then, a while later, the next roll of thunder would come down the ridge, and inside it, again the 3 slow knocks, timed to it, hidden in it, there and not there. It was doing it on purpose. That was the understanding that came over me, slow and cold, as I sat there counting, listening. My coffee gone cold in my hand. Whatever was at my door was timing its knocking to the thunder. It was waiting, out there in the storm, for each roll of thunder to come, and knocking only then, inside the cover of it, so that the sound would be half swallowed, half doubtable, so that I could never be quite sure, so that a reasonable man would tell himself over and over that it was nothing, just the storm, just his nerves. It had found a way to knock at my door that would make me doubt my own ears, that would let me explain it away. Roll after roll, that would keep me sitting there, uncertain, instead of doing the sensible, frightened thing. And the patience of that, the cleverness of that, the sense of something out there in the black storm, cunning enough to hide itself inside the thunder, was worse by far than if it had simply hammered on the door. Because a thing that hammers wants in by force, and a thing that hides its knocking inside the thunder, wants something stranger, wants to work on you slow, wants you uncertain and listening and slowly coming undone. I never went to the door. I want to say that plainly. Some deep old part of me, the part that the mountains put in a man whether he wants it or not, knew with total certainty that I must not go to that door, must not open it, must not even go near the window beside it to look out. And I obeyed that part of me, and I sat where I was, across the room, and I did not move toward the door, and I did not call out. And I gave whatever was out there nothing but my silence. But I could not stop listening, and I could not stop counting, and the knocking went on, hidden in the thunder, 3 slow knocks for each roll, patient, tireless, deep into the storm and deep into the night. And as the storm wore on and the knocking went on with it, I noticed a thing that frightened me even worse, if that was possible. The knocks didn't come from quite the same place each time. The first ones had come, plainly, at the height a man knocks, at the middle of the door. But as the hours crawled by, the knocking seemed to move, lower. Each set of 3 knocks came from a little lower on the door than the set before, working its way down toward the bottom of the door, down to the height a person would knock from if they were kneeling, or crouched, or low to the ground, until near the end of it, the 3 slow knocks were coming from, right down at the very base of the door, down by the threshold, low, patient, 3 at a time, inside the thunder, from something at the foot of my door that was no longer standing. I do not know how long it went on. Hours. The storm raged and slowly wore itself out, the thunder coming farther apart, as the worst of it moved off down the hollow and over the far ridge. And as the thunder thinned, so did the knocking, because the knocking needed the thunder to hide in, and with longer and longer gaps of nothing but rain between, until at last there came a long stretch with no thunder at all, only the rain easing on the tin, and no knocking in it, and then the rain itself thinned to a drizzle, and then to nothing, and the first gray of dawn began to come up over the hollow, and the night was over. And I was still sitting exactly where I'd sat all night, rigid, cold, my hands cramped around a cup of coffee I'd never drunk, alive and undisturbed, and never having gone to the door. When there was full daylight, I made myself get up and go and look. I unbarred the door, and I want you to know my hands were shaking doing it. And I opened it onto the wet gray morning, the hollow dripping and washed, and ordinary in the daylight, the storm gone, the world innocent the way it always is after a hard rain. And I looked at my porch, at the wet boards, and at the soft wet ground beyond the porch steps, looking for tracks, for the prints of whatever had stood at my door all night. Because surely a thing that knocks for hours leaves some mark in wet ground. There were no tracks. None. Not on the rain-soaked ground beyond the porch, not on the wet boards of the porch itself, no boot prints, no bear prints, no sign at all that anything had crossed that yard or stood at that door, the rain-washed mud smooth and unmarked clear to the tree line, as though nothing had come to my house in the night at all. But there was the handprint, low down on the door, down at the very bottom of it, near the threshold, exactly where the last of the knocking had come from in the small hours. A handprint, wet, pressed onto the wood of my door from the outside. At the height a person would make, reaching up from their knees, or from lower than their knees. The print of a hand flat against my door. Low, where nothing standing could have left it. I stared at that wet handprint a long time in the gray morning light. And then I went inside and I shut the door and I barred it. And I did not touch the print, and I did not wash it off. And by midday, it had dried and faded the way a wet print does. And it was gone. And there was no proof left in the world that anything had happened at all, except what I carried in me. I lived in that house a while longer, because it was my people's place, and I'm a stubborn man, and I had nowhere else I wanted to be. But I never loved the rainy nights again. That was the thing it took from me, among others. The sound I had loved most in all the world, the rain on the tin, and the thunder rolling down the ridges, became the sound I dreaded above all others, because I knew now what could hide inside the thunder, what could time itself to the storm, and knock at my door in the cover of it, low and patient and leaving no track. And on every stormy night after that, I sat up rigid and listening, dreading the gap inside the thunder where the knocks might come. And they did come again. Some nights, over the years, I stayed. Not every storm, but enough. 3 slow knocks hidden in the thunder, working their way down the door. And I never once answered, and I never once found a track in the morning. Only, now and again, low down on the wood, a wet handprint at the height of something kneeling. I'm gone from that hollow now, finally, in my old age, moved down to the flat country, and the towns where the storms are just storms. But I'll tell you the thing that I have never been able to lay to rest, the thing that comes for me still on the rainy nights, even down here where I'm safe. It's not that something came and knocked at my door in the storm. It's the cunning of how it knocked. A wild thing, an animal, a feral man, a lost stranger, those knock plainly, or scratch, or call out, or break in. But the thing at my door understood thunder. It understood that if it hid its knocking inside the thunder, I would doubt, I would hesitate, I would sit and listen and come undone slow instead of fleeing. And that doubt was the door it was really working at, not the wooden one. And I lie awake on the stormy nights even now, and I think about how patient it was, and how clever, and how it knew exactly how a lonely man's mind works in the dark. And I think that the handprint was always too low, always at the height of a thing, kneeling at my door in the rain. And I have never been able to stop wondering, on the worst nights, what it was doing down there, so low, so patient, kneeling at my door all through the storm, and whether it was knocking to be let in at all, or whether it was, the whole time, only listening at the gap under the door, learning the sound of me the way these things learn, against some rainy night still to come. A storm caught me at a rented cabin deep in the Blue Ridge. The first night of a week, I'd booked alone to get away from things. And I remember being almost glad of it when it rolled in at dusk, because there is something cozy about being shut up snug in a cabin in the mountains with a hard rain coming down outside. It was a good cabin, a sturdy log place, well up a winding mountain road, isolated the way I'd wanted. No neighbors in sight. The nearest other place a good way off, and the little town 20 minutes down the mountain. The road up to it was the kind that switches back and forth up the grade, hugging the mountainside, a drop on one side and the rock on the other, the kind of road you take slow even in good weather. And the weather that night was not good. It came down cold and hard, a real Blue Ridge soaker, the temperature dropping with it, the rain hammering the roof and sluicing off the eaves, the kind of cold, drenching mountain rain that makes a man deeply grateful for 4 walls and a roof and a fire. And I had all 3, and I settled in for the evening, feeling lucky and warm and content. It was near 1 in the morning, the storm still pouring down. When the knocking came, I was still up, reading by the fire, not yet gone to bed, when it came at the cabin door, a knocking, and with it, right away, a voice. A man's voice, calling through the door over the sound of the rain, and it was a pitiful sound, a soaked, shivering, desperate sound. He said his car had gone off the road. Down the mountain, he said, on one of the switchbacks, in the rain. He'd lost it on the wet road and gone off. And he was hurt, and he was freezing. And he'd seen my light, climbed up to my cabin, and please would I let him in, out of the rain. He was going to die out there in the cold, please. And I want you to understand that every decent instinct I have rose up at once to open that door, because that is exactly the kind of thing that happens on those roads. People do go off them in the rain, especially flatlanders who don't know the mountains, and a man who's wrecked and hurt and out in that cold, drenching rain at 1 in the morning is a man in genuine mortal danger, hypothermia danger, the kind of trouble where minutes matter, and you do not leave a fellow human being to die of the cold a few feet away on the other side of your door. Everything I was raised to be, everything decent in me, wanted to throw that door open and pull the poor man in by the fire and get him warm and call for help. My hand was halfway to the door before I'd thought at all. But something stopped me, and I have spent the years since both blessing and cursing the thing that stopped me, because to this day I do not fully know whether it saved my life or damned my soul. What stopped me was that, even in my rush of pity, some cooler part of my mind had started ticking through the facts, and the facts didn't fit. There was no car. That was the first thing. I'd have heard it. A car going off a mountain road, even in a storm, makes a sound. The squeal, the crash, the impact, metal on rock, and on that quiet mountain, with only the rain, I'd have heard a wreck. Especially on the switchbacks below me, which weren't far, and I'd have seen it, or seen the headlights of it, coming up the road before it wrecked, because you can see the headlights of a vehicle working up those switchbacks for a good while before it reaches you, the beam swinging across the timber as it takes the curves. I had heard nothing. I had seen no lights. The nearest curve where a man might go off was the better part of a mile down the mountain, a long way for a hurt and freezing man to climb in the dark and the pouring rain to reach my door. And I had heard no wreck and seen no lights, and that was wrong. That was all wrong. And then there was the voice itself, and the longer I listened, the more wrong it got. A freezing man, a hurt man, a man in the mortal panic of the cold. That man does not stay still. He moves. He comes to the window to plead his case where you can see him, see his soaked clothes, see the truth of his desperation. He tries the door himself. He moves around, looking for another way in, looking for shelter against the wall, doing the 1,000 restless, desperate things a body does when it's dying of cold and terrified. And he changes. His voice breaks differently as the minutes pass. The cold takes him further. He gets worse. Or if you don't answer, he gives up and moves on to try to save himself some other way. This voice did none of that. It stayed at the door. The exact same spot, never coming to the window, never trying the door, never moving around the cabin. Just there, at the door, knocking and begging, in that same soaked, shivering, pitiful tone, never quite getting worse, never quite giving up, never doing any single thing that a real freezing man would do, except make the sounds of one. And it stayed. That's the thing that finally turned the pity in me to cold dread. A real man, getting no answer, freezing, would have moved on within minutes, gone to find another cabin, another shelter, anything, because to stay knocking at one unanswering door is to choose to die on that doorstep. This stayed for hours, hour after hour, All through the depth of that storm, the voice at my door, knocking, begging, telling me how cold it was, how it was going to die out there, asking me why. Why wouldn't I help? What kind of man leaves another to die in the cold? Please, please, just open the door. It worked on me. I'll be honest about that. It pressed on exactly the thing it should not have been able to know to press on: the decency, the guilt, the unbearable thought of a man dying a few feet away, while I sat warm and safe and refused him. And as the hours wore on and the voice never stopped, the pressure of it grew almost more than I could bear, because every minute I didn't open the door was a minute I was, maybe, letting a man die, and the maybe was the hook, the maybe was the whole of the torment. I sat against that door. I don't fully know why I put myself there, my back against the inside of the door, on the floor. Except that I think some part of me needed to feel the door against my back, needed to know that as long as I was sitting against it, I could not, in a moment of weakness, open it. And I sat there, my back to the wood, with the voice on the other side of it, inches away, knocking and pleading and freezing and dying, or saying it was, all through the rest of that long storm, and I did not open the door. I covered my ears at times. I prayed at times. I argued with myself, ran the facts over and over. No car, no lights, no wreck, doesn't move, doesn't worsen, doesn't leave. Told myself over and over that no real man behaves this way, that this is a thing the mountains do, that I'd been warned in 100 old stories, never to open my door to a voice in the night, no matter how it begged. And underneath all of it, the whole time, the small cold voice of my own decency, saying, but what if? What if you're wrong? What if it's a real man, and you're sitting here letting him die because you frightened yourself with stories? The voice stayed until dawn. As the first gray began to show at the windows, and the rain finally began to ease, the knocking slowed, and the begging quieted. And at some point in the graying, the way these things always seem to go, it simply stopped. And there was nothing on the other side of the door but the dripping of the easing rain. And I sat against that door until there was full light, not trusting the silence. And then at last, stiff and hollowed out and shaking, I got up and I opened the door onto the gray, dripping morning. There was no one there. Of course there was no one there. The porch was wet and empty, the storm spent, the mountain dripping and washed, and ordinary in the dawn. And I made myself do the thing I dreaded, the thing I had to do to know. I got in my own vehicle, white-knuckled, and I drove down that mountain road, down all the switchbacks, slow, looking over the edge at every curve, looking for the wreck, looking for the car that had gone off in the night, looking for the hurt man who'd climbed up to my door, and then, getting no answer, crawled back down to die in the rain. And there was nothing. No wreck, no car off the road at any curve, no tire marks tearing off the edge, no broken brush, no sign anywhere on that whole mountain road that any vehicle had gone off it in the night or ever. The road was empty and whole and ordinary, all the way down to the town, and there had been no wreck, and there had been no man. I cut my week short. I drove down off that mountain that same morning, and I did not go back, and I have never rented a place that isolated again. And here is the thing I carry, the thing the summary of it can't hold, the thing that has never let me forgive myself, and never let me be sure I did the right thing. By every sign, by every fact, by all the old wisdom of that country, the thing at my door was not a man, and to open the door would have been to invite in something that wears a freezing man's voice, the way other things wear the dead. And I was right not to open it, and I am almost certainly alive, because I didn't. I know that. But knowing it has never once silenced the other voice, the small cold one that speaks up on the rainy nights. Because I cannot prove it. I cannot ever prove it. There is a version of that night, however small, however unlikely, in which a real man really did go off that road somewhere I didn't think to look, really did climb to my door, really was freezing and dying, and begging a fellow man for his life. And I sat against the door with my back to him, and my hands over my ears, and let him die in the rain, because I had frightened myself with mountain stories. I don't believe that's what happened. Everything in me says it wasn't a man. But the not being able to know is its own permanent punishment. The exact punishment, I have come to think, that the thing intended, because whatever it was, it understood that the cruelest thing it could do to a decent man was not to get in, but to make him spend the rest of his life unsure whether he'd refused a monster or murdered a man. And on the cold, rainy nights, I am still, all these years later, sitting against that door in the dark, listening to a voice beg to be let in out of the rain, and not knowing, never knowing, whether I should have opened it. I bought the old place up in Appalachia to fix up, the way people do who have more ambition than sense. An old 2-story farmhouse up a quiet road that had sat empty a good while and gone cheap because of all the work it needed. I'm handy, and I'd taken a notion to do it myself, to live in the house while I worked on it, room by room, fixing it up over a year or two into something fine. And I moved in that fall with my tools and a camp bed and started in. It was a sound old house, under the neglect, good bones, the kind they built to last, and I was happy enough up there alone, with my work, the quiet of that country, the satisfaction of bringing an old place back. I started downstairs, the way you do, the rooms I'd actually use first, the kitchen and a bedroom and the front room, and I got those livable, and I lived in them while I worked my way outward. The upstairs I left for later. There were several rooms up there, and they were in rough shape, and I wasn't using them, and that high old house was hard to heat. So early on, I'd done the sensible thing and closed the upstairs off to keep the cold from settling down into the part I lived in. Most of the upstairs rooms I just shut the doors on, but there was one room at the end of the upstairs hall that had a door that wouldn't stay shut on its own, the old latch worn out, and so that one I'd locked. There was an old skeleton key lock on it, and the key had been left in the house, on a nail in the kitchen with some others, and I'd turned that lock and pocketed the key and thought no more about it. Just a cold, empty room, locked to keep the draft out, a practical thing, nothing more. I want to be clear that there was nothing strange about that room when I locked it. I'd been in it. It was empty, an ordinary old bedroom, bare floor, one window, nothing in it at all. I locked an empty room to keep out the cold, and I had the only key on a nail in my kitchen, and that was the simple end of it, or should have been. The knocking started on a rainy night, a few weeks in. I'd come to learn, over the time I lived there, that it was always the rainy nights, though I didn't know that yet the first time. It was after midnight, a hard rain on the roof, and I was downstairs in my camp bed, half asleep when I heard it. From upstairs, a knocking, slow, patient, a knocking on a door, coming down from the second floor through the quiet house. I lay there and listened, and at first I thought it was the storm, a branch on the roof, a shutter, the old house working in the wind. But it wasn't the irregular knock of wind and branch. It was deliberate. 3 knocks, a pause. 3 knocks, the patient rhythm of a person knocking at a door, wanting to be let through. And it was coming from upstairs, from the end of the hall, from the locked room. And then I came fully awake, and the cold went through me, because I understood where exactly it was coming from, and the direction of it made no sense. The knocking was coming from inside the locked room, from the wrong side of the door. I had locked that room from the hall, the key in my pocket, the room empty when I locked it. A knock on that door should come from the hall side, from someone in the hallway wanting into the room. But this came from within. The patient knocking of someone on the inside of a sealed, empty room, knocking on the door to be let out. I lay there a long while, telling myself everything a man tells himself, that I was half dreaming, that the storm was throwing sounds around the old house, that an animal had gotten into the room somehow. A bird down the chimney, a squirrel in the walls. But the knocking went on, patient and deliberate, and unmistakably the knocking of a hand on a door from inside that locked room. And at last I made myself get up and get the key off the nail in the kitchen and take a flashlight and go up those stairs in the dark with the rain hammering, because a man can't lie there listening to that and not go look, much as everything in him wants not to. I went up the stairs and down the hall to the locked door, and the knocking was coming from right behind it, from the inside, getting no fainter as I came. 3 knocks and a pause. 3 knocks. And I stood at that door with my heart going, and my hands shaking on the flashlight, and I put the key in the lock and I turned it, and I opened the door. The room was empty and cold, the bare floor, the one window. Nothing in it, no one in it, no animal, no bird, nothing. The room exactly as I'd locked it weeks before, undisturbed. Dust on the floor unmarked by any track, but the draft from the open door stirring it. I shone the flashlight in every corner, into the closet, such as it was, at the window, which was painted shut, the old paint sealing it into its frame. Hadn't been opened in years by the look of it. No way in or out that way. There was no way into that room but the door I'd just unlocked, and no one and nothing in it, and the knocking had stopped. The instant I opened the door, and the room was just a cold, empty old bedroom with the rain at its sealed window. I stood there a long moment, and then I told myself the thing you tell yourself, that it had been the storm after all, some trick of the old house. And I pulled the door shut and locked it again, and went back down to my bed, and I did not sleep well, but I slept. The next rainy night, it came again. After midnight, the rain on the roof, and the knocking from upstairs, from the locked room, from inside. And this time there was a voice with it. It was low. It came through the door and down the stairs to me, low and patient, under the knocking, a voice asking me to open the door. Asking me, please, to open the door. Saying it wanted to come out. Saying it had been in there a long time. A low, patient, reasonable voice, from inside a locked, empty room that I had the only key to, knocking and asking to be let out, telling me it had been in there a long time and wanted to come out. And I lay in my bed downstairs and did not move, and did not go up, because the first night I had gone up out of the need to understand. And now I understood enough. And the understanding was that there was a voice in my locked, empty room that wanted me to open the door, and that I must not, under any circumstances, open the door. I did not go up. I lay there and listened to it, the knocking and the low patient asking, please open the door. I want to come out. I've been in here so long, please, all through that rainy night. And I did not go up the stairs, and toward dawn it stopped, the way it always stopped with the light. After that night I stopped going up to the second floor at all. I gave up the whole idea of it, the renovation, the working room, by room outward, all of it. I confined myself to the downstairs, lived in the rooms I'd made livable, and I left the stairs alone, and most of all, I left that locked door alone. And I never once, after that night, went up to it again, no matter how it knocked, no matter how it asked, no matter what it said in that low, patient voice on the rainy nights. Because I had come to understand the shape of it, the trap of it. The first night, it had only knocked, and I'd gone up and opened the door, and found it empty. And I think now that the emptiness was the point. That the first time it shows you an empty room precisely so that you'll doubt, so that you'll tell yourself it was nothing, so that you'll keep the habit of opening the door. And the second night it had a voice. And I understood that the knocking and the asking were patient, endlessly patient, and that all it wanted, the only thing it wanted, was for me to open that door from the outside, to be the one who turned the key and let out whatever had been sealed in there, long before I ever bought the house, and locked an empty room to keep out the cold. It had been in there a long time, it said. I believed that part. I believe it had been in there a long time, behind that door in that room, sealed, and that the locking of it was not something I had done, but something that had been done long ago, and that I had only, by chance, by the key on the nail, maintained. And that the worst thing I could ever do, the thing it knocked and asked and waited for, on every rainy night, was to open it. I lived in that house another few months, downstairs only, and then I gave up and sold it. I'd lost all heart for the renovation, couldn't stand the nights, and I put it on the market and took the first decent offer. A young family, nice people, glad to get a sound old house, cheap to fix up themselves, the same as I'd been. And I sold it to them with that upstairs room still locked. I left the key. I had to leave the key. It went with the house. I couldn't very well take it, and I couldn't bring myself to do anything else with it. I put it back on its nail in the kitchen where I'd found it. And I told the buyers the truth about a great many things, the wiring, the roof, the foundation, all the honest disclosures a man makes. But I did not tell them about the room. I did not tell them that on the rainy nights after midnight, the knocking comes from the second floor, from the room at the end of the hall, from inside a locked door. I did not tell them that there is a voice that asks, patient and low, to be let out, that says it has been in there a long time. I did not tell them to keep that door locked no matter what, to never, ever turn that key, to never go up on the rainy nights. I told myself they'd think me mad, that it would queer the sale, that it wasn't my business anymore once the papers were signed. But the truth, the thing I carry, is worse than cowardice about the sale. The truth is that I don't know what's right. I don't know whether I should have warned them to keep it locked forever, or whether the only mercy would have been to never sell them the house at all, or whether, and this is the thought that comes for me on the rainy nights, in my safe new place far from that hollow, whether some night a curious child in that house, or the father wondering why one room is locked, will take the key off the nail and go up the stairs on a rainy night to the knocking, the way I did the first time, and turn it in the lock and open the door, the way I almost did, the way it has been so patiently waiting for someone to do. And I'll never know. I sold the house, and I left the key and I drove away, and somewhere up that hollow tonight, if it's raining, the knocking is coming from inside that locked room, patient, asking to be let out, telling whoever lies awake downstairs that it has been in there a long, long time, and waiting, with all the time in the world, for the one of them who finally goes up and opens the door. My husband and I lived up a mountain road in Appalachia, far back, the way we liked it, in a little house he'd half built with his own hands, and for the years of our marriage, it was the happiest place I ever knew. But it was lonesome, and it was a long way from anyone. And Daniel worked nights. He drove for a living, long shifts that brought him home in the small hours. And so, for a good part of every week, I was alone in that house, up that dark road through the night, waiting for him to come home. I was not a fearful woman, but anyone alone in a remote place in the dark hours learns a certain wariness, and Daniel knew it and worried about it. And so early on he'd come up with a thing between us A small thing. That meant more to me than I ever told him. He had a way of knocking. When he came home late, instead of just coming in, or instead of knocking the way anyone knocks, he'd give our signal at the door. 3 knocks, in a particular rhythm that was ours, that we'd made up together, so that I'd hear it through the door in the dark and know, before I ever got up, before I ever unlocked anything, that it was him, that it was my Daniel home safe, and not be frightened. 3 knocks, that particular way. It was such a small thing, but across the years, it became one of the dearest things in my life. That sound, because it always meant the same thing. It meant he was home. He was safe. The long night of waiting was over. The man I loved was on the other side of that door. I heard that knock 1,000 times, 2,000, every working night of our marriage, and every single time it filled me with relief and gladness, that 3-beat rhythm that nobody in the whole world knew but the 2 of us. Daniel was killed on the highway one rainy night, coming home from his shift. A wreck down on the wet road, in the dark, another driver. The details don't matter, and I can't stand to say them. He never made it home. The knock never came that night, and I sat up waiting and it never came, and instead there were headlights that weren't his, and men at my door with their hats in their hands, and that was the end of my life as I'd known it. I buried him. I did the things you do. And then I was alone in that little house, up the mountain road that he'd built, with the silence where his knock used to be. And I do not have words for that silence. The silence of every night now, the homecoming that would never come again. And I stayed on in that house because I couldn't bear to leave the place he'd made, even though every night in it was a knife. It was 3 weeks after I buried him, on another rainy night, after midnight, that the knock came at the door. His knock. I was in bed, not sleeping, the rain coming down hard the way it had the night he died, and through the dark and the rain it came, at the front door. 3 knocks, in that rhythm, our rhythm, the particular 3-beat signal that was ours and ours alone, that nobody else in the world knew, that I had not heard in 3 weeks, and had thought I would never hear again as long as I lived. I came up out of that bed before I knew I'd moved, my whole body answering. That sound the way it had answered it. For years. The way you answer the thing your heart has been breaking for, and for one wild swimming instant, the last 3 weeks simply fell away and were not real. There had been no wreck, no men at the door, no grave. It had all been some terrible long nightmare, and Daniel was home, late from his shift, knocking our knock, and I was running to let him in. I got to the door. I had my hand on the lock, and through the door, over the rain, came his voice. It was his voice. Tired the way he always was at the end of a long shift, and wet, rain in it, and dear, so dear, my Daniel's voice saying he was home, saying he was sorry he was late, asking me to let him in. Honey, it's me. I'm home. Let me in out of the rain. His voice. The voice I had loved for half my life. The voice I had thought silenced forever. On the other side of the door, asking me to open it. I have never in my life wanted anything the way I wanted to open that door. I want you to understand that, because it's the whole of this, the terrible heart of it. Everything I was. Everything I had lost. Every night of that 3 weeks of grief that had hollowed me out to nothing. All of it strained toward that door, toward the knock and the voice, toward my husband come home. My hand was on the lock. My fingers were turning it. The grief and the longing and the impossible, unbearable hope of it had me, and I was opening the door. I was going to open the door. I was going to have him back. All I had to do was turn the lock and open the door, and Daniel would be standing there in the rain, and everything would be all right. And something stopped me, and I have thanked God and cursed him for it every day since. because it was the smallest thing, and it was the only thing. And without it, I do not know what would have come through that door. The knock came again. Because I'd hesitated, my hand frozen on the lock, the longing and some deeper animal dread at war. In me, the knock came again. Our knock, to hurry me, to call me, and this time, in my terror and my grief, I counted it. I counted the knocks, and there were 4. 4 knocks. Our signal was 3. It had only ever, in all the years, every single time, been 3. 3 knocks, that particular rhythm, 1,000 times, 2,000, never once 4, never once any other number. 3 knocks was the whole of it, was the thing that made it ours, was the exact shape of the signal my husband and I had made between us. And the knock at my door that rainy night was 4. 4, where there had always, only ever, been 3. It had the rhythm almost right, it had the voice exactly right. It had everything right, but that one thing, it had given me 1 knock too many. It did not know that the number was the heart of it. It had learned the sound, the rhythm, the voice, learned them so perfectly that they had nearly walked me, grief-blind, to open that door. But it had not learned, could not learn, the one small private truth that lived only between Daniel and me, which was that the signal was 3, only 3, always 3. And in giving me a 4th knock, it had told me, as plainly as anything could, that whatever was on the other side of that door was not my husband. I took my hand off the lock. I stepped back from the door, and the cold that came over me then, replacing the terrible warmth of the longing, was the coldest thing I have ever felt, because I understood that I had been 1 turn of the lock, 1 heartbeat, away from opening my door in the middle of a rainy night to something that had my dead husband's voice, and very nearly my dead husband's knock, and that wanted, more than anything, for me to open the door. It knocked for a long time. When I didn't open the door, when I stood back from it in the dark, it kept on. Our knock, 4 beats now that I was listening for it and could not unhear, and the voice with it, Daniel's voice, and oh, it was cruel, what it said, because it knew, somehow, exactly what to say to a grieving widow. It said it was cold. It said it had been gone so long, and it just wanted to come home. It said, "Please, honey. It's me. Why won't you let me in? Don't you know me? It's me. I'm home." It pressed on every part of my grief. My husband's voice begging me through the door to let him come home out of the rain. And I stood in the dark of the house he'd built with my hands over my mouth, and the tears pouring down my face, and I did not open the door. And it was the hardest thing I have ever done, or will ever do, harder than burying him, because burying him I'd had no choice. And this I had to choose, over and over, every minute of that long night, to keep choosing not to open the door to the sound of my husband begging to come home. It stopped near dawn, the way I would later learn. These things always stop near dawn. The rain eased, and the gray came up, and the knocking quieted, and the voice fell silent. And when there was full light, I made myself open the door, and there was no one. The porch wet and empty, no track in the soft wet ground. Nothing, only the washed and dripping morning and the silence. I left that house. I couldn't stay after that. I left the place my husband built, the place I'd loved, because I could not bear another rainy night in it. Could not bear to sit alone in the dark, dreading the sound that had once been the dearest sound in my life. I moved down off the mountain to the town, to a small place with neighbors close on every side, and I have lived there since. And the rainy nights are only rainy nights now, mostly. But I'll tell you the thing I carry, the thing that has never let me go and never will. It's not the fear, though I was afraid. It's the grief doubled. Because for 3 weeks I had grieved my husband, and the grief was clean, terrible but clean, the honest grief of a woman who has lost the man she loved. And that thing at my door took even that from me, fouled even that, because now, when I remember Daniel's knock, our knock, the dearest sound of my marriage, I cannot remember it clean anymore. It is tangled up forever with that rainy night, with the 4 knocks and the begging voice, and the thing that wore him to get at me, and I can never again think of my husband coming home, knocking our knock, without thinking of the thing that learned it. They took that from me, whatever it was. And the very worst of it, the thought I have never spoken to a living soul, is the one that comes on the rainy nights even now, even safe in town with the neighbors' clothes. The small, traitorous, grief-poisoned thought that will not die, which is that I will never be completely certain it wasn't him. That some part of me will always wonder whether, on some rainy night 3 weeks after I buried him, my Daniel really did find his way home one last time, cold and lost and wanting in, and knocked our knock at our door, and got the number wrong, because the dead don't remember the way the living do. And whether I stood on the other side of that door with my hand on the lock, and would not let my husband come home out of the rain. I'd gone up to the lake house alone that autumn, to close it down for the season, the way somebody in the family did every year. And I'll admit, I was glad of the solitude. It was a place my family had owned for a long time, a rambling old house set right down on the shore of a lake, way back in the Appalachian Mountains, miles up a winding road, the nearest neighbors a good distance off around the shore, and most of them gone home already. For the year, the way lake people clear out once the cold comes on. By the time I drove up that October, it was the off-season in earnest. The summer people gone. The other houses around the lake shuttered and dark, the whole lake fallen into that deep, still emptiness it gets when the warm weather's done, and the house and the water and the woods around all to myself. I had a few days' work to do, draining the pipes and covering the furniture, and shuttering the windows, and all the rest of closing a place down, and I figured on a quiet, solitary stretch of it. And the first day was exactly that, good, honest work in a beautiful, lonesome place. The storm came in that first night, an autumn storm, cold and hard, the rain coming down off the mountains and onto the lake, the wind moving the bare trees, the kind of night that makes a remote old house feel very far from everything. I didn't mind it. I had the place snug, a fire going, and I sat up a while, listening to the rain on the roof and the water, and then I turned in the downstairs bedroom, and I was drifting towards sleep with the storm working outside, when after midnight, the knock came at the front door, 3 knocks, slow, even, deliberate, at the front door of a house, miles up a mountain road, on a stormy night in the dead off-season, with every other house around that lake dark and empty and no soul for a long way in any direction. I came awake at once, my heart going, and I lay still and listened, and there was nothing but the rain, and I told myself it was the storm, a branch, a shutter, the old house in the wind, and then it came again. 3 knocks, plain and patient and unmistakable, a hand on the front door, and I knew it was no branch, and I lay there in the dark not answering, because something about it, even then, even before I understood, told me not to answer. I didn't answer, and so it moved. That's the thing I have never been able to get out of me, the thing that makes this different from any ordinary fright in a lonesome place. When I didn't answer the front door, the knocking stopped there and started again somewhere else. At the side of the house, 3 knocks, the same slow, patient, 3 on the side window, the window of the room I was lying in, a few feet from my head, on the other side of the wall in the glass. I went rigid, and when I didn't answer that, didn't move, didn't make a sound, after a while it stopped there too, and came again from further along. The back door now, 3 knocks, patient, asking to be let in at the back of the house. and then the window over the kitchen sink around the other side, and then, working its way on around, the bedroom window at the far end of the house. It was circling. It was going around the outside of the house, all the way around, stopping at every door and every window in turn, knocking its slow, patient, 3 knocks at each one, trying every single way into that house, one after another, methodical, unhurried, all the way around the whole house. And then, I realized as it came back to where it had started, beginning the circuit again. I lay in the dark and tracked it by the sound, around and around my house, all night in the rain. The front door, the side window, the back door, the kitchen window, the bedroom window, around to the front door again. 3 knocks at each, patient, even, never hurried, never angry, never missing one, never breaking the rhythm, circling the house in the storm, hour after hour after hour, trying every way in. And here is the thing that made it the most frightening night of my life, and it is not what you'd think. It never tried to break in. That's the horror of it, the particular horror that I have never been able to make anyone fully understand. It never forced a thing. It never rattled a doorknob, or pushed at a window, or threw its weight against anything. It never broke a pane of glass or splintered a frame. There was nothing violent in it at all. Nothing of the break-in, the home invasion, the thing trying to get at you by force. It only knocked, politely, 3 knocks at each door and each window, asking the way a caller asks to be let in, and then, getting no answer, moving on to the next, courteous, patient, and trying that one. It was asking, that was the whole of it. Around and around my house all night in the storm, it went door to door and window to window, and asked politely at each one to be let in. And the courtesy of it, the patience of it, was 1,000 times worse than violence. Because violence ends. Violence is a thing that happens and is over. But this was a thing that would simply keep asking, forever, at every way into my house, with all the time in the world. And never tire, and never force the issue, and never need to, because it understood something that I came to understand too, lying there in the dark, tracking it around and around, that it did not have to break in. It only had to wait. It only had to keep knocking, politely, at every door and every window, night after night, patient, courteous, tireless, until some night, some moment of weakness or exhaustion, or forgetfulness, or simple human breaking, I opened one. That was all it needed. It did not need to force a single lock. It needed only for me, once of my own hand, to open a door. I did not open a door. I lay in that bed all through that storm, frozen, tracking the patient circuit of it around my house, the front door, the side window, the back door, the kitchen window, the bedroom window, around and around, 3 knocks at each, hour after hour, the rain pouring. And I did not get up, and I did not go to any window to look, and I did not answer any of it, not with my voice and not with my hand. And it was the longest night of my life by a measure I can't express. And toward dawn, as the storm began to ease and the gray began to come up over the lake, the knocking came slower, the circuits further apart. And then at some point in the graying it stopped, and there was only the rain easing on the roof and the still gray light coming up. And the house was quiet, and I was alive, and I had not opened a door. When there was full light, I made myself get up and go, all the way around the inside of that house, looking out every window in turn, at every door, looking for some sign, and there was nothing. The ground around the house wet and washed and empty, no track in the soft mud beneath any window, no print on any porch, nothing forced, nothing marked, no sign at all that anything had circled my house all night, knocking to come in. I did not finish closing the place down. I left that morning. I locked it up rough, and I drove down off that mountain, and I have never gone back to that lake house, not once. and I made my excuses to the family and let someone else see to the closing every year since. And here is the thing I carry, the thing that comes for me on the stormy nights. I got away. I never opened a door, and the dawn came, and I left, and I never went back, and so it never got in, and I am here to tell it. But I never beat it. That's the thing. You cannot beat a thing like that, because it was never trying to win in a single night. A thing that breaks down your door, you can fight, or flee, or survive, and it's over. But a thing that only knocks, patiently, courteously, at every way into your house, asking to be let in, and is willing to do it night after night, season after season, year after year, with all the time in the world, and no need ever to force a thing, there is no beating that. There is only not opening the door, every single time, forever, without one slip. I escaped it only because I left. Only because I never went back to that house, and so was never there on the nights it surely kept coming, kept circling, kept knocking its patient, 3 knocks at the front door, and the side window, and the back door, and the kitchen window, and the bedroom window of that empty house in the storms, asking to be let in, waiting with endless courtesy for someone to be inside, and to be tired enough, or grieved enough, or fooled enough, or simply human enough to open just one door, just once. And I think about my family, who still use that lake house, who still go up there, and I have never been able to make myself tell them why I won't. And I lie awake on the stormy nights, wondering which of them is up there. Tonight, in the off-season, closing the place down, alone, hearing the knock come after midnight at the front door, and then move to the side window, and then the back door, around and around the house in the rain, patient and courteous and tireless, and whether they'll know, as I knew, not to answer, or whether, some stormy night, one of them finally will. I had a cabin deep in the mountains that I'd go to when I needed to be away from people. A plain little place far up a bad road with no neighbors for miles, and the timber close all around, and I'd spent enough nights alone up there over the years to know its sounds, to be comfortable in its solitude, to not be the kind of person who frightens at the dark and the quiet of deep country. I tell you that, so you'll understand that what happened the night I'm going to tell you about did not happen to a nervous person, a city person spooked by the woods. It happened to a man who knew that country and that cabin and was at home in both, and that is part of why it has never let me go. It was a storm night, a hard one, the kind that comes down off the high ridges in the mountains and settles in to pour. Cold autumn rain hammering the roof, and the wind moving the black timber all around the cabin, and I was glad enough to be inside it, snug with a fire, the way you are on such nights. I'd sat up late with the storm and then gone to bed, and I was lying there in the dark listening to the rain when, well past midnight, the knocking came at my door. I came awake the way you do, all at once, every sense sharp, because a knock at a cabin door, deep in the mountains, in the middle of a storm, is a thing with no good explanation. There was no one up that road. There'd been no vehicle, no headlights laboring up the grade, nothing but the storm. And yet there it was, knocking. But it was wrong from the very first. Wrong in a way that took me a moment to place. And when I placed it, the bottom dropped out of me. It was the height of the knock. The knocking was low. Not at the middle of the door where a man knocks. Not even low, like a person stooping. It was down at the very bottom of the door, near the threshold, and there was a particular quality to it. A reaching quality. The knocks came, and then, higher up, a fainter padding, scrabbling sound, as though whoever was knocking was small, was down low, and was reaching up toward the doorknob, toward the latch, and couldn't quite reach it. It was the exact way a very small child knocks at a door. down at the bottom where its little fist falls, reaching up on its toes toward a knob set too high for it. That was the height of the knocking at my door in the storm, and the recognition of it, the bone-deep instant recognition of what makes that particular low-reaching knock, went through me cold before I'd even heard the voice. And then I heard the voice. It was a child. A small child's voice, out in the cold, pouring rain on the other side of my door, crying. Not pretend crying, not a wail. The real broken, hitching cry of a frightened little one. A small child crying its heart out in the dark and the storm. And through the crying came the words, the small, desperate words of a lost child. It said it was lost. It said it was scared. It said it couldn't find its mama. It said, please, please, please let me in. I'm scared. I'm cold. I can't find my mama, please. A small child alone, in a mountain storm, in the freezing rain, miles and miles from any house or any help, crying and knocking low on my door in the middle of the night, begging to be let in. I have replayed that night 10,000 times in the years since, and I will replay it 10,000 more before I die, because of what I did, and because I will never, ever be sure it was right. Because here is the war that broke out in me, lying there in the dark, with that sound coming through my door. Everything I am, everything any decent person is, every instinct that a human being has toward a child in distress, the deepest and most powerful pull there is in us, rose up screaming to throw open that door. There is no sound on this earth that reaches deeper into a person than a small child crying in fear and cold and asking for help. It bypasses every thought, every caution, goes straight to the oldest part of you, the part that would walk into fire for a child, any child, a stranger's child, and a child alone, and lost and freezing in a mountain storm, is the purest distress there is, the thing no person with a soul could ignore. My body was already moving. I was already up. My hand was reaching for the door, because there was a child out there, dying of cold in the rain, and I was going to let it in. Of course I was going to let it in. What kind of monster lies in his warm bed and listens to a child cry at his door and does nothing? And, against all of that, holding me back by my fingertips, was the cold knowing. Because there was no child up there, there could not be. I was miles up a bad road in the deepest part of those mountains. No house for a long way in any direction. No vehicle had come up that road, and the idea of a small child somehow being out there, alone, on foot, in a freezing storm in the dead of night, having traveled however many miles of black wilderness to reach my door. It was not possible. It was not possible. A child could not be there. And I knew the things the old people of that country say, the warnings that come down through the hill families, the ones they give you with a look that means it, that there are things in those mountains that come to your door in the night, wearing a voice that will work on you, that come as the dead and the lost and the hurt and the loved, that come as whatever sound will get you to open the door, and that the one thing you must never do, no matter how it begs, no matter whose voice it wears, is open the door. And I knew, the way you know a thing in your bones, even as your whole heart fights it, that nothing makes a person open a door like a child crying, that if a thing wanted, more than anything, to get a decent person to open his door in the night, the perfect, the unbeatable, the most cruel and cunning thing it could be, was a small lost child crying in the rain. I did not open the door. I want you to understand what that cost, because it is the whole of this, and it is a thing I am not sure I'll ever be forgiven for, by God or by myself. I did not open the door, and so I had to lie there, and then sit there with my back against the far wall of that cabin, with my hands over my ears that did no good at all, and listen to a child cry and beg and knock low on my door for hours. Hours. The crying did not stop. The small reaching knocks did not stop. Down at the bottom of the door, the little padding scrabble of a child reaching for a knob it couldn't reach. The voice begged and cried and got more frightened, more desperate, more heartbroken. Please, please, why won't you let me in? I'm so cold, I'm so scared. I can't find my mama. Please, I can hear you in there. Please let me in. For hours, through the whole storm, a small child crying and pleading and knocking at my door to be let in out of the freezing rain. And I sat against the far wall and did not go to it, and told myself over and over and over, through my own tears, because I was weeping too by then, that it was not a child, that it could not be a child, that there was no child, while every cell in my body screamed at me that there was, that I was letting a baby die in the cold, that I was the monster the warnings should have been about. It went until dawn. As the storm finally began to ease and the first gray light came up, the crying grew fainter and the low knocking slowed, and somewhere in the graying it stopped. The way these things stop, and there was only the easing rain and the gray light and a silence that was somehow worse than all the crying had been. And I sat against that wall until the sun was fully up, unable to move, and then I made myself go to the door, and I opened it onto the wet gray morning, the storm spent, the woods dripping and washed and innocent in the daylight. There was nothing there. The porch was wet and empty, and the ground beyond it, the soft, wet mud of the yard that would have held the print of anything, of anyone, of small bare child's feet most of all. The ground was smooth and washed and unmarked, no track, no print, no sign that anything at all had stood or knelt or reached at my door in the night. Nothing, clear to the black tree line. I left that cabin that morning, and it was a long time before I could make myself go back, and I never again spent a stormy night in it alone. And I have lived with it ever since, the thing that has never resolved and never will. By every fact, by every piece of mountain wisdom, by the smooth, unmarked mud where small feet would have left their mark, the thing at my door was not a child. I know that. I tell myself that there was no child, and I am almost certain I am right, and that opening that door would have let in something that wears a lost child's cry the way it wears the dead, and that I am alive and whole because I kept it shut, but almost. That's the word I have to live inside for the rest of my life. Almost certain, because I cannot prove it, and there is a version of that night, however impossibly small, that I can never fully close the door on in my own mind. The version where somehow, some way, against all sense and all the facts, a real child really was out there, really was lost, really had wandered impossibly far into those mountains, and found my door in the storm, and cried and begged and knocked low on the wood for hours, and froze to death in the rain, a few feet from a warm fire, and a man who heard every cry and would not open the door because some old stories had frightened him. I do not believe that's what happened. Everything in me says it wasn't a child. But everything in me is the same, everything that screamed all night to open the door, and I overrode it, and I will never, ever know for certain whether I outsmarted a monster or abandoned a child, and that not knowing is the exact shape of the wound that thing left in me. And I have come to believe it was the wound it meant to leave all along, that whether it got in or not, it would have me forever sitting in the dark on the stormy nights, hearing a child cry at my door and never being sure. I built my cabin on a steep mountainside in Appalachia, on a piece of land I'd bought cheap, precisely because it was so steep that nobody else wanted it, the kind of near vertical mountain ground that most people look at and shake their heads. But I wanted the view, and I wanted the solitude, and a man who knows what he's doing can build on a slope like that the way they've always done in those mountains. by setting the downhill side up on posts. So that's how my cabin sat, the uphill side resting more or less on the ground, and the downhill side built out on tall locust posts over the falling slope so that the floor was level while the mountain dropped away beneath it. It's a common enough way to build in that country. You've seen the old places perched out over the hollows on their posts. The thing about my particular cabin, the thing that matters to this story, was the front door. Because of how the ground fell away, the front door, on the downhill side, opened out a good 12 feet above the rocks of the slope below. There was no porch on that side. I'd never built one, never gotten around to it. And so the front door, in truth, opened onto nothing. You couldn't use it to go in or out. If you opened that door and stepped through it, you'd drop 12 feet onto the broken rocks of the mountainside. To actually get in and out of the cabin, you used the side door on the uphill end, reached by a long stair that climbed up the slope. The front door was just there, a door that had come with the plan that I kept locked and never used, that opened onto a straight drop. Below it was nothing, no porch, no landing, no ground, no place for a person to stand, just the sheer posted wall of the cabin, and then the rocks 12 feet down. I want you to hold that picture clearly, the front door high up on the posted wall, with nothing beneath it but air and a fall, because the whole horror of what happened lives in it. It was a rainy night, past midnight, the cold mountain rain coming down hard on the roof, and the wind moving the timber on the slope. And I was in bed, in the dark, not yet asleep, when the knocking came at the front door, the high door, the one 12 feet up the wall with nothing beneath it. I came awake all the way at once and lay rigid because my mind could not make it fit, could not make it be. There is no way to knock at that door. There is no porch, no landing, no ground, nothing beneath it for a person to stand on. To knock at that door, a person would have to be floating in the air, 12 feet off the rocks, on the steep downhill side of the cabin, in the dark and the pouring rain. And yet the knocking came from it, plain and unmistakable. 3 slow, patient knocks on the wood of the front door, the high door, the door that opened onto a fall. I lay there and told myself it was a branch, the wind throwing something against the wall, the storm. But the knocking came again, 3 slow, deliberate knocks, the knock of a hand, of knuckles on wood, patient and even, from a place where nothing could possibly be standing to make it. I did not get up at first. I lay in the dark and listened to it. 3 slow knocks, a pause, 3 slow knocks, coming from the empty air outside that high door, on and on, while my mind ran through every impossible explanation and discarded each one. A branch doesn't knock 3 times, and pause and knock 3 times again. The wind doesn't keep a patient rhythm. And there was no tree close enough on that side to reach the high door, and nothing for a thing to climb, just the smooth posted wall and the rocks below. There was no way for anything to be at that door. And there was something at that door, knocking. At last I made myself get up. There was a window beside the front door, a window that, like the door, looked out from 12 feet up onto the falling slope, and I made myself cross the dark cabin to it, my heart slamming, the knocking continuing the whole way, 3 slow knocks and a pause, 3 slow knocks, and I got to that window, and I made myself look out into the rainy dark. There was nothing there, nothing on the long stair. But the stair was on the other end of the cabin anyway, the uphill end, nowhere near this high door. Nothing clinging to the wall, no shape pressed against the posted side of the cabin, no person somehow climbed up and hanging there in the rain. Nothing on the rocks 12 feet below that I could make out in the dark and the downpour. Nothing in the air outside that door where a thing would have to be to knock at it. Just the rain, falling through my window light into the dark, and the black slope dropping away, and the empty air outside a door that opened onto a fall. And from that empty air, while I stood at the window, looking straight at the nothing that was there, the knocking went on. 3 slow knocks on the wood of the door, inches from where I stood at the window, from a place where I could plainly see there was nothing at all. I have tried many times to convey the particular horror of that, of looking directly at the empty rainy air where the knocking was coming from, and seeing nothing there, and hearing the knock anyway, the solid, patient knock of knuckles on wood, from nothing, from air, from 12 feet up a sheer wall over the rocks. It was worse, somehow, than if I'd seen a face at the window, a shape on the wall, some horror clinging there in the rain. A horror you can see is a horror your mind can hold. This was a horror you could not see and could not deny. A knocking with no knocker, a hand with no body, patient and deliberate and real, on a door that no living thing could reach, and standing at that window, looking at the empty air it came from. I felt the floor of the world drop out from under me the way the slope dropped out from under that door. I backed away from the window. I backed all the way across the cabin to the uphill wall, the far corner, as far from that high front door as the cabin allowed me to get, and I put my back in that corner, and I slid down to the floor. And I sat there, and I did not go near the front door or its window again that night. And the knocking went on, from the empty air outside the high door, 3 slow, patient knocks, a pause, 3 slow knocks, hour after hour, all through that storm, from nothing, from a place where nothing could be. It never changed. It never grew angry or hurried. It never tried the latch. And I was glad of that, beyond words, because the thought of that high door coming open onto the rainy dark in the fall, and whatever was knocking being on the other side of it, hanging in the air 12 feet up, was a thought I could not bear and pushed away every time it rose. It only knocked, patient, from the impossible empty air, asking, I suppose, to be let in through a door that opened onto nothing. And I sat in the far corner of my own cabin all night and did not let it in, and could not have told you that whole long night what would have come through that door if I had, or how, or from where. It stopped near dawn, the way these things do, as the storm eased and the gray light began to come up the slope. The knocking slowed and then ceased, and there was only the rain easing on the roof, and I sat in my corner until there was full light, and then I made myself get up, on legs that barely held me, and go to that high front door. And I unlocked it, and I opened it onto the gray wet morning, onto the steep slope dropping away, and the rocks 12 feet below, and the empty air where the knocking had come from all night. There was nothing. Of course there was nothing. There was no place for anything to have been. Just the rain-washed slope, and the dripping timber, and the long drop, and the door opening onto it, onto nothing, the way it always had. I never used that high front door again. Not that I ever had, but after that night I did more than not use it. I boarded it over, nailed it shut, and then planked over the whole frame inside and out, sealed it so it could never open, blinded the window beside it, walled off that whole end of the cabin's awareness as best I could. And I stayed on at the cabin a while longer, because I'm stubborn, and it was my place, and I'd built it with my hands. But I never again spent a stormy night easy in it, because the knocking came back. Some rainy nights, from behind the boards now, from the sealed high door, from the empty air over the rocks, where nothing could be, patient. 3 slow knocks and a pause, and I'd sit in my far corner and listen to it, and not go near it, and in the morning there'd be nothing, the way there was always nothing. And here is the thing I carry from it. The thing that's different from all the other tales of things that knock in that country, and the thing that frightens me worst when I let myself think on it. All the other knocking, the things that come to people's doors in the night in those mountains, they come to doors a person could reach. They come to the front door, the porch, the windows, places where, if you let yourself imagine it, a thing could be standing in the dark, wanting in. But mine came to the high door, the door with nothing beneath it, the door 12 feet up a sheer wall over the rocks, the door that opened onto a fall, the one door of my cabin that no person, no animal, no living thing could possibly reach. The door I'd built by accident into a place where nothing could ever stand. And it knocked there. It chose that door, and I have come to understand that this was the whole message of it, the thing it wanted me to know, that it did not need a place to stand, that the rules of standing, of reaching, of climbing, of being somewhere a thing can be, did not apply to it, that it could knock at a door in the empty air, 12 feet off the ground in the rain, because it was not bound by the ground, or the air, or the fall, the way a living thing is bound. It came to the one door I'd have sworn nothing could ever knock at, precisely to tell me that there is no door, anywhere, high or low, sealed or open, sheer-walled or porched, that is out of its reach. And I think about that on the rainy nights, in the new house I have now down in the safe, flat country, in an upstairs room with the window a good way off the ground, and I do not feel as safe up here as a person should, because I learned, in that cabin on the posts, that height is no protection, and a drop is no protection. And there is no door anywhere that something cannot come and knock at in the night from the empty air if it has a mind to. I built my cabin on a steep mountainside in Appalachia, on a piece of land I'd bought cheap precisely because it was so steep that nobody else wanted it, the kind of near vertical mountain ground that most people look at and shake their heads. But I wanted the view, and I wanted the solitude. And a man who knows what he's doing can build on a slope like that, the way they've always done in those mountains, by setting the downhill side up on posts. So that's how my cabin sat, the uphill side resting more or less on the ground, and the downhill side built out on tall locust posts over the falling slope so that the floor was level while the mountain dropped away beneath it. It's a common enough way to build in that country. You've seen the old places perched out over the hollows on their posts. The thing about my particular cabin, the thing that matters to this story, was the front door. Because of how the ground fell away, the front door, on the downhill side, opened out a good 12 feet above the rocks of the slope below. There was no porch on that side. I'd never built one, never gotten around to it. And so the front door, in truth, opened onto nothing. You couldn't use it to go in or out. If you opened that door and stepped through it, you'd drop 12 feet onto the broken rocks of the mountainside. To actually get in and out of the cabin, you used the side door on the uphill end, reached by a long stair that climbed up the slope. The front door was just there, a door that had come with the plan, that I kept locked and never used, that opened onto a straight drop. Below it was nothing, no porch, no landing, no ground, no place for a person to stand. Just the sheer posted wall of the cabin, and then the rocks 12 feet down. I want you to hold that picture clearly. The front door high up on the posted wall, with nothing beneath it but air and a fall, because the whole horror of what happened lives in it. It was a rainy night. Past midnight, the cold mountain rain coming down hard on the roof, and the wind moving the timber on the slope. And I was in bed, in the dark, not yet asleep, when the knocking came at the front door, the high door, the one 12 feet up the wall with nothing beneath it. I came awake all the way at once and lay rigid, because my mind could not make it fit, could not make it be. There is no way to knock at that door. There is no porch, no landing, no ground, nothing beneath it for a person to stand on. To knock at that door, a person would have to be floating in the air, 12 feet off the rocks, on the steep downhill side of the cabin in the dark and the pouring rain. And yet the knocking came from it, plain and unmistakable. 3 slow, patient knocks on the wood of the front door, the high door, the door that opened onto a fall. I lay there and told myself it was a branch, the wind throwing something against the wall, the storm. But the knocking came again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, the knock of a hand, of knuckles on wood, patient and even, from a place where nothing could possibly be standing to make it. I did not get up at first. I lay in the dark and listened to it. 3 slow knocks, a pause. 3 slow knocks, coming from the empty air outside that high door, on and on, while my mind ran through every impossible explanation and discarded each one. A branch doesn't knock 3 times and pause, and knock 3 times again. The wind doesn't keep a patient rhythm, and there was no tree close enough on that side to reach the high door, and nothing for a thing to climb. Just the smooth, posted wall and the rocks below. There was no way for anything to be at that door. And there was something at that door, knocking. At last I made myself get up. There was a window beside the front door. A window that, like the door, looked out from 12 feet up onto the falling slope. And I made myself cross the dark cabin to it, my heart slamming, the knocking continuing the whole way. 3 slow knocks and a pause. 3 slow knocks, and I got to that window, and I made myself look out into the rainy dark. There was nothing there, nothing on the long stair. But the stair was on the other end of the cabin anyway, the uphill end, nowhere near this high door. Nothing clinging to the wall, no shape pressed against the posted side of the cabin. No person somehow climbed up and hanging there in the rain. Nothing on the rocks 12 feet below that I could make out in the dark and the downpour. Nothing in the air outside that door where a thing would have to be to knock at it. Just the rain falling through my window light into the dark, and the black slope dropping away, and the empty air outside a door that opened onto a fall. And from that empty air, while I stood at the window looking straight at the nothing that was there, the knocking went on. 3 slow knocks on the wood of the door, inches from where I stood at the window. From a place where I could plainly see there was nothing at all. I have tried many times to convey the particular horror of that, of looking directly at the empty rainy air where the knocking was coming from, and seeing nothing there, and hearing the knock anyway, the solid patient knock of knuckles on wood, from nothing, from air, from 12 feet up a sheer wall over the rocks. It was worse, somehow, than if I'd seen a face at the window, a shape on the wall, some horror clinging there in the rain. A horror you can see is a horror your mind can hold. This was a horror you could not see and could not deny, a knocking with no knocker, a hand with no body, patient and deliberate and real, on a door that no living thing could reach, and standing at that window, looking at the empty air it came from. I felt the floor of the world drop out from under me, the way the slope dropped out from under that door. I backed away from the window. I backed all the way across the cabin to the uphill wall, the far corner, as far from that high front door as the cabin allowed me to get, and I put my back in that corner, and I slid down to the floor, and I sat there, and I did not go near the front door or its window again that night. And the knocking went on, from the empty air outside the high door. 3 slow patient knocks, a pause, 3 slow knocks, hour after hour, all through that storm, from nothing, from a place where nothing could be. It never changed. It never grew angry or hurried. It never tried the latch. And I was glad of that beyond words, because the thought of that high door coming open onto the rainy dark and the fall, and whatever was knocking being on the other side of it, hanging in the air 12 feet up, was a thought I could not bear and pushed away every time it rose. It only knocked, patient, from the impossible empty air, asking, I suppose, to be let in through a door that opened onto nothing, and I sat in the far corner of my own cabin all night, and did not let it in, and could not have told you, that whole long night, what would have come through that door if I had, or how, or from where. It stopped near dawn, the way these things do, as the storm eased, and the gray light began to come up the slope. The knocking slowed and then ceased, and there was only the rain easing on the roof, and I sat in my corner until there was full light, and then I made myself get up, on legs that barely held me, and go to that high front door, and I unlocked it, and I opened it onto the gray wet morning, onto the steep slope dropping away, and the rocks 12 feet below, and the empty air where the knocking had come from all night. There was nothing. Of course there was nothing. There was no place for anything to have been. Just the rain-washed slope, and the dripping timber, and the long drop, and the door opening onto it, onto nothing, the way it always had. I never used that high front door again. Not that I ever had. But after that night, I did more than not use it. I boarded it over, nailed it shut, and then planked over the whole frame inside and out, sealed it, so it could never open, blinded the window beside it, walled off that whole end of the cabin's awareness as best I could. And I stayed on at the cabin a while longer, because I'm stubborn and it was my place, and I'd built it with my hands. But I never again spent a stormy night easy in it, because the knocking came back, some rainy nights, from behind the boards now, from the sealed high door, from the empty air over the rocks, where nothing could be, patient, 3 slow knocks, and a pause, and I'd sit in my far corner and listen to it, and not go near it, and in the morning there'd be nothing, the way there was always nothing. And here is the thing I carry from it, the thing that's different from all the other tales of things that knock in that country, and the thing that frightens me worst when I let myself think on it. All the other knocking, the things that come to people's doors in the night, in those mountains, they come to doors a person could reach. They come to the front door, the porch, the windows, places where, if you let yourself imagine it, a thing could be standing in the dark wanting in. But mine came to the high door, the door with nothing beneath it. The door 12 feet up a sheer wall over the rocks, the door that opened onto a fall, the one door of my cabin that no person, no animal, no living thing could possibly reach, the door I'd built by accident into a place where nothing could ever stand. And it knocked there. It chose that door. And I have come to understand that this was the whole message of it, the thing it wanted me to know, that it did not need a place to stand, that the rules of standing, of reaching, of climbing, of being somewhere a thing can be, did not apply to it, that it could knock at a door in the empty air 12 feet off the ground in the rain, because it was not bound by the ground, or the air, or the fall, the way a living thing is bound. It came to the one door I'd have sworn nothing could ever knock at, precisely to tell me that there is no door anywhere, high or low, sealed or open, sheer-walled or porched, that is out of its reach. And I think about that on the rainy nights, in the new house I have now down in the safe flat country, in an upstairs room, with the window a good way off the ground, and I do not feel as safe up here as a person should, because I learned, in that cabin on the posts, that height is no protection, and a drop is no protection, and there is no door anywhere that something cannot come and knock at in the night, from the empty air, if it has a mind to. I'd had my own night with the knocking, up at the place I rented in a deep hollow in Appalachia. A rainy night after midnight, 3 slow patient knocks at my door. A voice I half knew asking to be let in, and me sitting against the door till dawn not opening it. The way something deeper than sense told me I must not. I've told that part elsewhere. What I want to set down here is what I learned after, when I started, careful, to ask around about it. Because it turned out my night was not my own at all, and the learning of that was worse, in its way, than the night itself. I didn't go asking openly. You learn quick in that country that there are things you don't ask outright, that the old hill people close up like a fist if you come at certain subjects head on. So I went sideways at it, over time, with the few old-timers I'd come to know well enough. A word here, a question there, mentioning I'd had a strange night in the storm, watching their faces. And the faces told me as much as the words. Because when I'd say it, when I'd mention the knocking on the rainy night, the old ones didn't laugh, didn't look at me like I was a fool spooked by the wind. They went still, they got a look. And one by one, the ones who trusted me enough, they told me pieces of the thing, and the pieces fit together into something that has changed how I think about every dark rainy night since. It wasn't just me. That was the first and worst of it. The knocking on those particular nights, the dark stormy ones, deep in the rainy season, after midnight, didn't come to just one house, one unlucky soul. It came to all of them, to every isolated house, up every hollow in that country, on the same night, at the same dark hours, the same 3 slow patient knocks, the same voice asking to be let in, at every lonely door, all through that country, on the same stormy night, while each household sat alone in its own dark, thinking itself the only one, thinking its own knocking was its own private horror, never knowing that up every other hollow, behind every other door, another family sat exactly the same, in the dark, holding their doors shut against the same patient thing. I cannot tell you how that knowledge landed on me. Because there's a loneliness and a horror you think is yours alone, but there's a different and vaster horror in learning that the thing that came to your door came to every door, that on that night you'd thought yourself singled out by some private bad luck. You were in fact one of dozens, scores, of people up those dark hollows, all sitting against their own doors at the same hour, all listening to the same 3 knocks, all telling themselves the same thing the old people had taught them. Do not open the door. Picture it. The whole of that country in the storm, every scattered house, a little island of dark and dread, and something going from one to the next, all night, up every hollow, knocking. Because that was the other thing they told me, the old ones, and it's the heart of it. The thing goes house to house. It doesn't knock at all the doors at once. Exactly, or maybe it does. Maybe there's more than one of it. Or maybe it's a thing that doesn't have to obey the rules of being in one place, the way mine had knocked at a door it couldn't have reached. But the way the old people tell it, on those nights it travels, hollow to hollow, house to house, all through the dark, and at each lonely door it stops, and it knocks its 3 slow knocks, and it tries to be let in. And the way it tries to be let in is the thing that has kept those families locking their doors on the rainy nights for more generations than anyone can count. Because it doesn't knock as a stranger. It knocks, they told me, wearing a voice it knows will work on the people in that particular house, a voice they'll recognize. At one house, it's a husband dead and buried. At the next, it's a child that was lost. At the next, a mother, a brother, an old friend, a neighbor from down the road. It goes house to house all night, trying every voice and every face it has gathered, and at each door it wears the one most likely to get that door opened. The dead loved one of that house, the lost one, the missed one, the voice that the people behind that particular door will least be able to refuse. And that is why the old people of that country have their rule passed down father to child for longer than the county has had a name. And they gave it to me plain once they decided to tell me anything at all. On those nights, you do not open your door. Not for anyone. Not for a neighbor saying he's broke down and freezing. Not for kin. Not for your own blood standing out there in the rain saying, "Let me in." Not for any voice you know, no matter how well you know it, no matter how it begs, no matter how certain you are. Because on the stormy nights after midnight, the old one said, any voice. At your door is the thing wearing a voice, and the surer you are that you recognize it, the more certain it is that you must not open the door. Because being sure you recognize it is exactly the trap, is exactly the thing it's gathered all those voices to do. And then they told me the part that has never let me sleep easy on a rainy night since. They told me about the ones who'd opened the door, because every family that's lived long in those hollows, the old one said, every old line that's been in that country for generations has lost someone that way. Somewhere back across the years, in every one of those families, there was a night, a stormy night after midnight, when the knocking came and someone, a grandmother, a young husband, a child, a great uncle, someone generations back or not so far back, heard a voice at the door. They were sure, they were certain, they would have sworn on their life that they recognized a dead wife, a son gone off and never heard from, a mother 3 years in the ground. And they could not do it, could not sit there against the door and refuse that voice, that face, that beloved lost one, begging to come in out of the rain. And they opened the door. And the old ones don't say what came in or what went out, only that the one who opened the door was lost, gone, in one way or another, never the same or never seen again, and that the family remembers it, keeps it, passes it down with the rule. Your great-grandmother opened the door on a rainy night to her dead son's voice, and that's why we don't open the door, not ever, not on those nights, no matter who it is. I sat with old men who told me these things in their kitchens, with the particular weight of people, handing down something true and terrible, and I understood that the rule I'd followed by instinct on my own night, the rule that had kept me alive, or worse than saved, was not my own good sense at all, but a thing in the air of that whole country, a knowledge those people lived inside of, a discipline of locked doors on stormy nights that they'd been keeping for centuries. Because the cost of failing it, even once, even one person in a family across 100 years, was a loss they could not undo. And I understood that on my own night, when I'd sat against that door and not opened it, I had been one lit point in a vast dark map of the same thing, one household among many up those hollows, all of us sitting in our own dark against our own door, while the thing went from one to the next, all night, in the rain, wearing the dead. I left that country not long after. I'd only been renting, only passing a season there, and once I understood what those rainy nights were, I had no more stomach for them, and I went back to the flat country and the towns. But the knowledge came with me, and it's a heavier thing to carry than the single night was. Because now, on the stormy nights, even here, even far away, I think about that country up in the mountains, those scattered houses up the dark hollows, and I know that tonight, if it's storming up there after midnight, the knocking is going house to house the way it always has, the same 3 slow knocks at every lonely door, the patient voice wearing whatever dead or lost or beloved thing each house will least be able to refuse, and that in all those dark houses, the families are sitting against their doors, keeping the old rule, not opening, not for anyone, not for kin, not for the voices of their own dead, and that somewhere up there, this night or some night soon, In some house where the grief is fresh enough, or the loneliness deep enough, or the voice at the door beloved enough, someone is going to fail. Someone always, eventually, across the generations, fails. Someone is going to hear a voice they cannot bear to refuse, and is going to rise in the dark and put a hand on the lock, the way I almost did, the way every one of us up every hollow almost does, and is going to open the door. And the family will keep it after, the way those families keep these things, and tell it to their children as the reason for the rule. And the rule will go on, and the knocking will go on, house to house up the dark hollows on the stormy nights, for as long as there are lonely doors in that country and dead behind them to be worn, which is to say forever. Which is to say it's happening up there tonight, while I lie here safe and far away, and cannot stop listening, on the rainy nights, for 3 slow knocks at a door. I'll tell you the one I'm ashamed of, the one I don't tell when people swap their stories, because all the others are stories of holding the line, of sitting against the door and not opening it, and surviving by their wisdom or their nerve. Mine is the other kind. Mine is the story of the night I opened the door, and what it cost me, which is everything since, and which is not over, and will not be over. I have come to understand, as long as I am alive to lie down at night, inside any walls at all. It was years ago, when I was younger, and didn't know the things I know now, didn't know the things the old people of that country know and live by. I was renting a place deep in Appalachia, an old house up a quiet road, far from much, the kind of isolation I wanted at the time. I'd not been there long. I knew nothing of the country's ways, none of the warnings, none of the rules about the rainy nights. I was just a man renting a house in the mountains. And when, on a rainy night near midnight, a knock came at my door, I thought nothing of it, but that it was strange, and a little unsettling, the way a late knock is anywhere. The knock came, 3 of them, and with it, a voice. And the voice was the most ordinary thing in the world. And that's the thing I have to make you understand, because it's why I opened the door. It was a woman's voice, ordinary, tired, a little embarrassed, the voice of an ordinary woman in an ordinary spot of trouble. She said her car had broken down the road, in the rain. She said she'd seen my light. She asked, apologetic, the way a person is when they hate to be a bother, if she could use my phone to call for help. That was all. There was nothing eerie in it, nothing that raised the hair on my neck, no dead loved one's voice, no child crying, none of the things that I know now to fear. Just a woman, broken down in the rain, wanting to use a phone, the most reasonable request in the world. And so, and God help me, it was the most natural thing. Anyone would have done it. I tell myself that, and it doesn't help. I went to the door, and I unlocked it, and I opened it. There was no one there. The porch was empty. The road was empty. There was no broken down car, no woman, no person anywhere in the rainy dark, nothing but the rain coming down, and the empty night, and the cold of it, rolling in through the open door, past me into the warm house. I stood there in the doorway, with the door open onto nothing, confused more than afraid at first, calling out a hello into the dark, that no one answered, telling myself she'd walked off, that I'd taken too long, that I'd imagined the whole thing, and after a moment I shut the door and locked it, and stood there, unsettled, and eventually I told myself some story about it, and went to bed, and I did not understand, that night, that I had done the one thing you must never do, that I had opened the door, and that in the few seconds it stood open onto the dark. Something had taken the measure of the inside of my house, and of me, because the next night, it knew my house better. The next night was rainy too, and near midnight the knock came again. But it did not come from the door. It came from inside the walls, from behind me, from the rooms at my back, from within the house, the same 3 slow knocks, but no longer outside asking to be let in. Inside, in the walls of the rooms behind me, knocking out, as though whatever it was, had been outside the night before, at the door, and was now within, in the very structure of the house, knocking from inside the walls of the place I slept. And I understood then, too late, with a horror that has never left me, what I had done. I had opened the door, only once, only for a few seconds, onto nothing, for the most innocent reason in the world. But once was all it needed. Once was enough for it to learn the inside, to get past the threshold that had been holding it out, to take up residence, not in the rooms exactly, but in the walls, in the bones of the house, on the inside of the line I was never supposed to let it cross. The door had been the barrier. The locked door against the rainy night knock was the whole of the protection, and I hadn't known, and I'd opened it. And now there was no door between me and it anymore, because it was already inside, in the walls, and you cannot lock a door against a thing that is already within the house. I left that house. Of course I left it. I broke the lease and I fled, the way you'd flee a house with something in its walls. And for a while, a few weeks, I thought I'd escaped, thought I'd left it behind in that old rented place up the mountain. And then came the first rainy night in the new place, the next place I'd moved to, miles away, a different house entirely. And after midnight, the knock came. From inside the walls, it had followed me. Or rather, and this is the thing I came to understand over the years, the true shape of my curse. It had not followed me through the world like a thing that chases. It was simpler and worse than that. Once I had opened the door to it, that one time, it had me, not the house. The house had never mattered. I had thought the thing was in the walls of that first house, but it wasn't the house's walls it had gotten into. It was mine. It was me it had taken the measure of. In those few seconds, the door stood open. Me it had learned and marked. And from that night on, it has known my houses, the way it first knew that one. Every house I have ever lived in since, across all the years, every place I have ever tried to make a home, it has known from the first rainy night, and it knocks, after midnight, from inside the walls of whatever place I am sleeping in, because the door I opened was never really the wooden door of that rented house. It was a door in me, and I opened it, and it does not close, and I have carried it open ever since, and a thing came through it that is now always, everywhere, on my side of every wall. I have moved and moved and moved. That has been my life, since that night, a life of moving. I have lived in cabins and apartments, and houses in towns, in the mountains and out of them, far from that country and near to it, and it has made no difference, none, because the thing is not in any of those places. It is in me, and it comes to whatever walls I bring it to. I have tried living in new buildings, thinking a house with no history, fresh walls, might hold nothing, and the knock comes from inside them, all the same. On the rainy nights, after midnight, because it is not the building's age that lets it in, but the door I opened years ago that I cannot shut. I have tried living with other people, never alone, thinking company might keep it off, and it knocks the same, from inside the walls, and the others never hear it, because it is not their walls, it is mine. I have lain awake on 10,000 rainy nights in 100 different rooms, listening to 3 slow knocks, come from inside the walls around me, patient, the same, always the same. The thing I let in the night, I opened the door to a voice asking to use a phone. And here is the worst of it. The thing I have never been able to make anyone understand, the reason I tell this as the one I'm ashamed of. It has never done anything. In all these years, all these houses, all these rainy nights, it has only ever knocked. From inside the walls after midnight, 3 slow knocks, and then no more, and nothing comes out of the walls, nothing harms me, nothing shows itself, nothing acts. And you might think that a mercy, that it only knocks, but you don't understand what it is to live inside it. Because the knocking from inside the walls is not asking to be let in anymore. It's already in. So what is it asking? What does a thing want that is already inside your walls, inside the line, inside you, and knocks anyway, patiently on the rainy nights, year after year, and only knocks? I have come to believe, in the long nights of thinking about it, that it is not asking for anything. I think it is reminding me. I think the knocking from inside the walls is the thing letting me know, on every rainy night for the rest of my life, that it is there, that it has been there since the night I opened the door, that there is no house I can move to, and no wall I can put between us, that the door I opened that one time onto the empty rainy dark is open still and will be open until I die, and that it is on the inside now, with me, patient, in no hurry at all, knocking, not to come in, because it is in, but to remind me, every rainy night, that one day the knocking will be for something other than reminding, and that I will not know which rainy night that is until it comes, and that I open the door myself, and that there is nothing now that I can ever do but lie in the dark, inside whatever walls I've brought it to, and listen to it knock and wait.